We're delighted to offer this webinar this week. We have many more that are coming up. We'll have a schedule out very soon of our webinars over the next several months. And I'm planning on trying to do at least one a month on some different topics and things that we can share. As you're logging in, just a couple of announcements. Just want to uh, let everyone know that we have our 49th conference coming up in Baltimore, Maryland. If you haven't received information on it, please reach out to us. We want to make sure everyone gets a chance to look at the information, make a decision about being there with us. We'd love to have you there with our TCF family in Baltimore, in the Harbor area, over 4th of July weekend. I mean, what better place to be celebrate our country's 250th anniversary than with our TCF family and friends. So hope that you'll come out and join us. We have a great lineup of keynote speakers. We're putting together some wonderful breakout sessions, over 100 workshops that you'll be able to participate in. We have interactive opportunities throughout the weekend. If you've never been to the conference, it's a great place to just make connections with other folks. So we hope that you'll come and join us for the conference. All right, it looks like we have most everyone in place. So we'll go ahead and get things started. My name's Andy McNeil, and it's my honor to serve TCF as your CEO. And it's my sacred honor to be able to share this webinar with you today. I just wanted to make a couple of comments, and then I'm going to share my screen and have some slides for you to follow along with. If you're wondering if the slides will be available afterward, we will work out sending an email to those of you who have registered with a PDF of the slides. So don't worry about trying to write too fast if you're taking notes. So we'll make that available to you. But I did want to make a couple of comments before we got too far into the presentation today. We are going to be talking about something that I think it's a topic that can be really challenging to have conversations around, particularly when we are grieving. Grief can rob us of our sense of hope and purpose. And in different places in our grief, the intensity of our grief, it can make some of the things that we'll talk about over the next hour seem unachievable, or maybe even we just might find ourselves at a place that it's just hard to hear some of the things that we're going to talk about over the next hour. And I just want to acknowledge that and just say that we are at different places in our grief at different times. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or that you're grieving the wrong way or you're doing it the wrong way. It just means that grief ebbs and flows, and we find ourselves at different places. And quite often, though we might feel stuck or we just feel like we don't have the energy, those can be normal experiences in our grief. And for those of you who are early in your grief, sometimes conversations like this on coping and on hope and purpose and topics like that can also be very difficult. Grief zaps us of our energy. It affects us mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. In so many ways, it disrupts our lives. And so sometimes in our grief, particularly early in our grief, the things that we can do are to breathe, to hold on, to experience our grief, to find someone who can be there with you and find that support. So I just want to acknowledge that we might be at different places, and some of the things we talk about today might not resonate, but some might. And just being open to what that looks like for you, wherever it is that you are in your grief. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get started into our topic today. Now, as we're going through this presentation, I would invite you, we do have a chat feature. I would invite you, if you would like, to chat. Uh, reach out to those who are here and viewing as well. We open to your reactions, and also if you would like uh, to say where you're located, where you're kind of coming in from, and if you'd like to share the name of your person or persons who you are remembering or you're honoring today, type that in the chat. It's a great way to just make a connection with those who are also here with us today. So our title and our topic today is Coping with Profound Loss. And it's my goal to do a series on just a Coping with Profound Loss series. Today, very specifically, we're looking at foundations of hope and purpose. This concept, or the concepts of hope and purpose, are something that have come up often over the last 30 years of being in this space and providing support and care, and even in my own life and my own journey with loss and grief. These topics tend to come up often. People might express and say, I feel like I don't have hope, or I lost my sense of hope, or I've had so many people say, I don't know what my purpose is anymore. I've had people say things like, I don't know how to put the next foot forward and what that looks like for me. And grief definitely can rob us of our sense of hope and purpose. And so as I've had these conversations over the years, I've picked up a few things just from people sharing with me where they find their sense of hope, what that looks like for them, how they have found purpose, what that looks like as they walk um, and they walk that journey of grief in their life. Um, and so some of this presentation is put together by those thoughts and those ideas. There's other parts of this presentation that are put together by conversations I've had with other colleagues, with other people, whether it's been in counseling sessions or people who are grieving or others who are supporting people in grief. And it's this conversation around the idea of hope. Hope just feels like a foreign concept sometimes. It's sort of this existential thought and wrapped up so often in our perspective or our perceptions in that moment of whether we have hope in our lives. And sometimes it just feels elusive. So in conversation with other colleagues, I really developed a number of thoughts and ideas around a concept called the components of hope. Like, what really makes up hope? Are there things in our lives that we can do that make hope more possible? And especially, are there things that we can do with ourselves when they're in the midst of our grief and our pain that can make hope more possible for us, at least that experience of that perspective or perception of hope in our lives that, again, so often can be a challenge when we have experienced a profound loss and we find ourselves deep in grief. So, with that sort of foundation, I just want to give a couple of reminders, though, as well. I said before that you might be in a lot of different places in your grief. And I just wanted to kind of remind us of what we're talking about when we talk about grief. There's so many different constructs out there around what grief is. And I just want to be clear, at least the foundation that I'm working from and the definition that I have when I think about grief. Now, I won't go into it. My last webinar was on this topic of understanding grief, and we talked about many of the constructs that we have in our society around what grief is that do not adequately reflect the experience of grieving people. And as a result of that, some of these things we hear from people that, you're grieving too long. When are you going to be over this? You need to get over it. People give all sorts of advice. The idea that somehow grief happens in predictable stages and it's linear in fashion. All of these ideas that grief should last about a year, and after that year you should be better. Um, Grief that's too intense, must mean something's wrong. All of the constructs that are out there, many of them are misguided, and they often cause us to just kind of go into the closet with our grief. We just stop telling people because we don't want people to judge us, or it's just tiresome trying to explain to people what it's really like when they have not experienced it. Right. And so we often end up alone in our grief. So I just wanted to offer a context for what are we talking about when we mean grief. And so I wanted to use this illustration of a storm. I don't know if you've ever seen a storm like this in the distance. You probably have. I live in South Florida. When storms are coming and building, we can see them for many, many miles away. And this is just a picture of a thunderstorm cell. And I want you to just imagine that you're standing in your front yard or on your front porch, or maybe you're out on the street. Maybe you're in your car and you're driving down the road toward a storm like this. And I just want you to imagine and think about, what is it that you're experiencing when you see a storm like this? What's going on inside of you when you see that storm? Now you can put some things in the chat if you'd like to, and share your thoughts on that. Um, when I ask this question, when I show this image to people, and I ask this question, I often get a lot of different responses live. One of them, which someone just put in there, is that they see a storm like this and they're like, "I think a storm is beautiful," and I agree with you. My wife describes it. She says, I have a sense of awe around a storm like this. It's kind of like a spiritual experience. It's just so beautiful, and you really experience it in your spirit. You know, it's not just physical, but you really have this sense of, wow, this is just beautiful, and sense of awe. This great thing that's happening in front of me. Another one that someone just dropped in the chat is some people are experiencing fear when they see a storm like this or the storm coming. Um, and associated to that, we can also feel a sense of anxiety. So you can have this fear, right? That maybe there was a bad experience as a child, or whatever it might be, or just it's so loud, and the thunder and the lightning and all of those things uh, together. Other people, it might be that physical anxiety reaction that you have. You can kind of feel it inside, and you have that reaction to a storm, right? I've had other people who have said, I have a sense of foreboding, like something's coming, like I need to somehow prepare for this storm, right? You got to go in and batten down the hatches and get things ready for the storm. Or other people have said, I'm disappointed because I had plans to be outside that day, and this storm is going to interrupt my plans. My social life is being impacted by this particular storm. I get migraine headaches, and so if a storm like this comes in quickly, that sudden drop in the barometric pressure can cause a migraine headache to come on, right? And very intense. So I have this physical reaction. I also, when I was a kid, my grandmother, she used to predict storms with her achy kneecaps. Now, I don't know if anyone else has achy knees, or if you have a grandmother that predicts storms with her knees, her achy knees. But she was right almost all the time. She would say, "You kids better get out and play because my knees are aching. It's going to rain today." And she was right. She really felt that physically. Or have you ever, when you see a storm like this, you wonder, is it coming this way? And then the temperature drops 10 degrees and the wind shifts and you feel that cool air on your face, right? Or have you ever smelled a storm? So part of what I'm doing here is I'm just building up this idea that a storm is an experience that we live. And we experience that storm mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, socially. There's really not a part of our lives that's not impacted by the storm. And this is why I wanted to use this illustration, is that in our society, we want to make grief something that's temporary, that goes away, that is time limited, that's a minor disruption. But the reality is that grief is a major disruption in our life. Grief turns our lives upside down. And like a storm, grief is an experience that we live. And we experience it mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, socially. There's really not a part of our life that's not affected by a profound loss. And as we talked about in the last webinar, grief really is not a restorative process. It's a transformative process. We actually land in a different place than when we started. Grief affects us and changes us, and we find ourselves quite often in a different place. And so, thinking about this idea and this concept of hope and purpose, and how do we have hope and purpose when our lives have been turned upside down? When, again, I'll just talk about early in our grief, where we feel like, our minds are affected, our bodies are exhausted. How can we even begin to think about higher concepts like hope and purpose? And again, it may not be that you're thinking about that right now. It may be you're just thinking about taking the next breath, hanging on, right? Finding some support, people who can be there and care for you along the way. Or you might find yourself in a place where you're saying, I've started thinking about this idea of hope again, of purpose. Like, what does it mean for me now? My life looks very different than it looked. Can I have hope? Can I have purpose? And what does that look like for me? And so, just remembering the foundation of all of this discussion is this. I'm not suggesting that hope and purpose are brought to us in our grief because we then find a way to fix the problem of grief. Grief is not a problem that we fix. It is a reality that we experience and we live. The goal is not to get rid of grief. It's to find ways to adapt our loss and our grief into our life and what that looks like. And that is not easy. No matter what anyone around you says, what society says, what friends and family might be telling you, grief is enduring, and grief is disruptive, and grief is something that we carry in our lives, and we learn to carry that in our lives. And coping are some of the ways we learn to carry it. And concepts like hope and purpose, though it may not feel like it's possible, many, many people have found that it is possible to grieve, to love a person, and that person dies, and we have grief in our life, and that becomes part of our life and our story, and also to be able to hold space for hope and purpose. Now, again, there's different seasons in our lives, and there's different places we might find ourselves, and it might feel more elusive at times than other times. But we're going to just kind of break it down and try to look specifically. This is just a slide reminding us grief is disruptive. Focus and concentration, assumptions of the world, ourselves and others, our relationships with family and friends, our routines, our traditions, our responsibilities. These are all ways that grief is disruptive, and hope and purpose quite often are disrupted in our grief. So let's break this down just a little bit. With that as our backdrop, recognizing that grief is something that we carry, grief is something we live, we experience. It's not a problem we're fixing. How can we, and can we, is it possible, and will it be possible? Maybe right now it's harder for a person, but will it be possible in my future? This idea of experiencing hope and purpose. So let's look at both of these words just together to start with. And then we're going to look at a few things that might make this more possible for us in our life. And then we're going to end our time by looking at those components of hope that I talked about earlier. So hope is associated with with desired outcomes, wants, aspirations, and positive feelings about your present and or your future life. Okay. So it's desired outcomes, wants, aspirations, it's positive feelings about that, your life presently and in the future. And then purpose, a definition for that is associated with personal meaning, a reason for being, or the reason for doing something. Okay. So if you think about these two concepts, having hope can actually impact our sense of purpose, right? But if I have these desired outcomes and positive feelings about them, quite often that leads to activity and actions and things that help bring purpose into my life. The other interesting thing is there's this bond between the two concepts because having a purpose can impact our sense of hope. When I feel connected to something, like I'm doing something positive in the world, or I'm contributing in some way, or I have a reason for being, right? And I have a reason for doing what I'm doing. Quite often, when we have that sensation or that sense in our life, that generates a sense of hope as well. So, in some ways, these two concepts are interconnected in a lot of ways. Um, both are associated with a person's personal outlook on life and our sense of meaning in life. Okay. So I just wanted to really talk about that connection between the two. I love this image of the heart, right? It looks like the yin and the yang, but it's this idea that they're both parts of a whole, is the idea behind that. So what are the factors then? If these are tied together in some way, what are some of the factors that can support hope and purpose in our life? Another way to think about it is, what are some factors that might make hope and purpose more possible for us to experience in our lives? Again, under whatever circumstances we might find ourselves in, how do we find hope and purpose, and what does that look like? We're going to look at four concepts, and then again, we'll talk about what are called components of hope. But I wanted to start by these factors that get us kind of thinking about these four quadrants, these four areas, to thinking about our personal agency and choices, our values and virtues, tenacity and audacity. And I'll explain that when we get to it. And then finally, just curiosity and awe. Okay. And we're just going to kind of look at each of these concepts. So the first one is personal agency and choices is a factor that often makes hope more possible in our lives. The fact that our choices matter, even small choices, sometimes it can be the smallest of choices. I had a lady say to me one time, it's early in her grief, and she was coming to counseling, and she came to one of the sessions, and she said, "It was so hard for me to get up out of the bed this morning, but I did." Exactly how she said it. It was so hard for me to get out of bed this morning, but I did. She made this choice, even though her body and her mind and everything was against her in that moment. And she almost said it like it was an accomplishment, because it was an accomplishment. Sometimes in grief, just getting out of bed is an accomplishment. Walking out our front door, right? Talking to another person. All it can be very small things. Listening to music can sometimes be a huge chore, right? Whatever that might look like. But this idea of personal choices. So it kind of got me thinking about the question: are hope and purpose a choice? Right? This idea: how much do hope and purpose have to do with other people in our lives. Uh, have you ever had someone say something that affects your sense of hope and purpose? I have. Sometimes people will say things and you walk away saying, wow, that was not helpful at all. Or our circumstances. I think our circumstances can impact our sense of hope. I'm going to talk about in just a moment Viktor Frankl, who survived the death camps in World War II. He described people in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, who were robbed of their sense of hope by the circumstance that they were in, right? Or our beliefs, or our lifestyle, our IQ, our EQ, our success, our net worth, well, just thinking about different things. How much do those things influence our hope, our sense of hope and purpose? And then it comes back to this question: is hope and purpose a choice? Do these things alone determine whether we can experience hope and purpose in our life? Well, hope and purpose are not just feelings. I think if we start there by saying hope and purpose, they are feelings that we have. We can feel a sense of hope or feel a sense of purpose, but they're not just feelings. They're also related to our choices. Hope and purpose are connected to activity just as much as they are a feeling that we might have. Both are more probable when we choose an action or lean into our own personal agency rather than just giving our choices over to just whatever is going to happen next. That we recognize that in any given circumstance, there are choices available to us. Now, I mentioned Viktor Frankl earlier. This is a quote from him from his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you've never read the book, I would encourage you to do so. It's worth your time. It's not a very long read, and I know you might be at a place in your grief where it's hard to read books, and I understand that. Um, uh, get it, put it on the shelf, have it ready when you're ready. But here's what he said: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now, Viktor Frankl wrote these words after surviving the death camps and after experiencing the death of all of his family members. One sister survived, I believe. Viktor Frankl and one sister. And so he was a man acquainted with grief. And he wrote these words because what he found in the camps is that he said the Nazis could take, they took all of our choices away. We really didn't have, they told us when to eat, when to sleep, what work to do, when to start work, when to stop work, when to go to bed, when to turn the lights out. All of that, they really their personal choices were taken from them. And so he had to dig deep to find those choices that he did have, to find that personal agency. And he called that space between the stimulus, his circumstances, and how he was going to respond to those circumstances. So he gave us a few ideas of how he did that in the death camps. And I think it relates to us in our experiences when we are going through life's when we're going through tragedy and profound loss and disruption in our life. What how we can still experience a sense of meaning and purpose in the midst of that. Now, he found these three things to be true in the death camps and after he got out of the death camps and he was grieving his family. The first thing he found is that he found a sense of meaning and purpose in creativity and work. He said by doing something, by creating something. And the way it worked for him in the camps is he didn't get to decide what he was going to do for work. It was decided for him. But he decided that whatever it was that he was doing, he was going to give it his 100% best. He was going to, if he was told to clean the kitchens, he was going to clean those kitchens and they were going to be spotless. They were going to be the best, cleanest kitchen you could ever want to see. And then when he did it, he would back up and take pride in what he created, just for a moment, and allow that to sink in around him. So creativity and work he found were important. Another thing he found was important was his relationship with others and with nature. Now, this is just relationships with people, and he added nature, or with an animal, or it doesn't have to be just a person, but it's when we extend ourselves out to others, we allow ourselves to be touched by something, right? Whatever that might be, a beautiful sunset, or a walk through nature, or whatever that might look like. Many years ago, I had a father who was coming to me for counseling, and the way he described it is he said, Andy, I just early in my grief, I just couldn't really do anything. He said, but I would force myself to go down to this park near where we lived. And it was a big park, and it had all these benches around this big lake, and there were all these different views of the lake. He said, I would just go sit on a bench and just stare at that lake, stare at that nature, and just not really do anything. And then I would sit there, and I would visit it the next day. And when I got tired of that scene, I would find another bench somewhere in a different place around the lake, and I would sit on that bench. And I just did that for a long time. He just needed this sense to feel connected to something else, or at least to just be around something else until he felt a sense of connection, because he didn't necessarily early on. I had a mother who described it to me this way. She came into counseling one time, it's probably 2 years after her daughter's death, and she something was different about her when she came in this time. And I asked her, I said, you seem different today. And she said, really, you can notice that? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, she said, after my daughter's death, I just felt like I needed to maintain my relationships, even though I didn't feel like maintaining them. She said, so I just made myself every year. I would, each summer I would still go and I would volunteer at my church for Vacation Bible School. And I would do that every summer. Um, but I didn't feel connected. I was just kind of going through the motions. I felt disconnected. People were around me, and I just didn't feel very present. She said, but something's different this week. She said, it's Vacation Bible School, and I just came from there. And she said, for the first time in 2 years, I actually felt fully present. I felt like I was connected to the people around me. And I just kept, that relationship going. Viktor Frankl, in the death camps for him, it was the connection he could make at night when the lights went out. It was being connected with nature in some way, even if it was just a tree or there was an animal that he saw in the woods. Whatever it was, he allowed himself to embrace it. And then the last thing he found purpose and meaning is by the attitude that he chose. And he described it this way. He called it the last of human freedoms, the last of our choices. And that is the attitude we choose in the midst of unbearable suffering. That's the word he used. He said those death camps were unbearable suffering. And I know that for many of us, grief, that is a definition of grief. It just feels unbearable, and it is unbearable. And he found that in the midst of that, he was still going to decide the attitude he chose when he interacted with other people, when he was out in the world, and what that looked like. He even went as far as to say the Nazis could kill me, but they weren't going to decide the attitude I had when they did. I was going to decide that. And he was taking charge of that part of his life. So there's something about our personal agency, our choices that we make. And again, it doesn't have to be big choices. It can be very small things that we begin to do in our lives, and we start to kind of gain a little bit of a ground. We start to remind ourselves that our choices do matter. Even in the midst of loss and pain, our choices matter along the way. Another factor that can contribute to hope and purpose somehow interconnected to this is this thing called values and virtues, what we believe and what we do about those beliefs somehow has an impact on our sense of hope and purpose in our lives. When we're going through unbearable suffering, as Viktor Frankl would call it, oftentimes it's hard to hold on to some of those values and virtues that we have been so important to us in our lives. Now, some people would say, no, that's when I lean in the most to those values and virtues. And I would say that it's important if you have certain beliefs and values that have meant something to you in your life, by all means, lean into those things. There's also research around that when we experience trauma or grief or loss or unbearable suffering, that the impact that has in our lives can also shape within us our values and our virtues. And then there's this concept of when our values and our virtues don't necessarily align with each other. And I'll talk about that. So let's look at values and virtues. And the way I like to distinguish these is I like to think of values as our beliefs. It's what we say we believe. So, for example, I believe in kindness. I think kindness is an important thing in our lives, right? Virtues are behaviors. So you can share a value and a virtue that are similar. So I believe in kindness. Because I believe in kindness, I choose to be kind to other people, right? And as a result, I could describe myself, or others might say, hey, that's a kind person, right? They might see you in that way. But it's your beliefs and your actions. Now, I might say I believe in kindness, and I might truly believe in kindness, but then you might catch me in a bad moment where I'm just having a bad day and I'm going off on someone and I'm not being nice. That's where I believe in kindness, but my virtues, I'm not wrapping myself in that virtue of kindness, right? I'm choosing a different action. And so somehow choice is connected in here, and what we choose to believe about the world, about ourselves, about others, and how we choose to behave in that way, and what that looks like in our life. So it's important that the values and virtues are aligned. And again, they're not always, and again, sometimes it's hard to align them together. A lot of things can challenge our sense of values and the virtues that we choose to wrap ourselves in. But if we think about like values, like what do you value? What's important? I would encourage you just make a list of your values. How have your values changed? What does that look like for you? Right. I had a gentleman who told me, and not to take this wrong, I think I shared this in my last webinar, but a gentleman who said, Andy, I like the person I am right now better than the person I was before my son died. But don't get me wrong, I would give anything to have my son back. But there's some values and things that are important to me now that I've changed in a lot of ways. I've grown, and in those changes, I like that person better, right? And so there are values and virtues that can be developed along the way. Part of it is just sometimes writing it down. I talked about in our last webinar how grief needs a language. Just take the time to just don't you have to write a whole book, but just give some words. What are some words? What is important to you? And then how might I align myself with those behaviors, with those beliefs? How might I make these beliefs behaviors? And because part of that is then now we are deep, even in a deeper way, leaning into our principles and our ideologies, what we really believe about the world, and you're leaning into your personal agency. So what do you value? Although you cannot control everything, we can ask the question, what type of person do I want to be? And that was really the question of Viktor Frankl in those death camps. What's the attitude I'm going to choose, even though I'm going through this, right? What can I control? I think he determined in the camps, and I think he says in the book, and someone can correct me if I get it wrong, but I remember he came up with a percentage of of um, his a percentage of his chance to survive. And I think he came up, I think it was like 22, 23%. That he had like a 22% chance that he was going to survive. But for him, that was enough. And then he was really trying to decide, you know, who who do I want to be in the midst of this? What are my core beliefs? How have they changed and adapted over time? And do my behaviors align with my core beliefs? I have values, those are my beliefs. I have virtues, those are my behaviors. How do they align? And do they align? These are just examples of some virtues. And again, I'll share these slides with you. There's many more values and virtues. There's actually a really great website, and I'll give you the URL for it. It is virtuesforlife.com, virtuesforlife.com. And if you put a backslash and put virtues list, it will take you to a page that lists a whole bunch of virtues. And you can just kind of look at those. And what I like about looking at things like this is that quite often it opens up our possibilities to say, yeah, I've never thought about that particular virtue. And maybe it gives me something that I can put as a goal, or as an intention that I want to very purposely lean into this particular virtue in my life. Then there's this concept of tenacity and audacity. And I think of this as not just our personal agency, but our ability to just be stubborn, to just go, I am going to get through this. I'm going to find my way through this, even if I don't feel like wanting to. I'm going to do it anyway. An idea of just tenacity and audacity. Tenacity is described as being very determined, continuing to exist, stay power, being persistent, firmness of purpose, kind of this resolute. I'm going to keep doing this. Like mom who said to me, it had been 2 years and I just kept at it. I kept at it. I think she used the phrase, fake it till you make it. She said, I just kept going. I kept meeting friends for coffee. I kept, kept coming here to counseling. I kept attending my compassionate friends group. I kept on in a stubborn way. And then the day came when she felt that sense of connectedness again. Right? It created that scenario for her. But then I also think about not just tenacity, the stick to itiveness, right? But also this idea of audacity, this willing to take bold risks, daring, courageous, right? Because grief in so many ways, I had a mom who described it this way. She said, Andy, I felt like a veil had been lifted. And there's this whole world that I didn't even know existed. And then I even thought about the things I said to people in the past at funerals and friends of mine who had a profound loss. And I felt bad because now I really knew, right? And she said, but there was this sense that this is unknown, but I'm going to step into it somehow. You've heard people say, "Wow, the audacity of that person," right? And a lot of people have said, like, there are bold risks that we take in our lives when we are going through a loss. Um, uh, uh, Colin Campbell, in his book Finding the Words, if you haven't read that book, it's a fantastic book. Colin Campbell really drives home this point where he really took some risks by reaching out to friends and family to say, when you said this to me, it was not helpful. That's not what I need from you. What I need is this. And he has a whole section in the book where he talks about building those relationships, but the courage that it takes to actually just be honest with the people around you, to say, that's not helpful. This is what I need. And he even decided what friends were worth saving that friendship, right? And others he let those go, but there were some that he felt like he needed because he still needed that connection to other people. So tenacity and audacity. And then the last one of these, curiosity and awe. Just this idea, this curious, a desire to know or learn things, a desire to experience new things. Because grief it just creates a new world. It's different. The journey is not backward. It's not back to something. it's forward to something, and it is different. And that's so hard, particularly when the life you had before, you particularly loved that life and the people who were in that life. And it's so hard to then lean into a reality that you didn't ask for, right? But this idea to just learn new things, a curiosity. Megan Devine, in her book, It's Okay to Not Be Okay, um, talks about this idea of almost making it like a science experiment. You know, try some things on. If they don't work, try something else. See how it affects your thinking, your feelings, your behaviors, and just do a little like a science experiment and try a few things on. And then this idea of awe, being awe-inspired. Who was it that said about the storm? I think storms are beautiful, right? This reverent respect, this wonder, this amazement that we allow to be part of our world. And part of that drives us outside of ourselves, because we have to open ourselves out into the experience, that sense of curiosity and awe. Now, these are some things, these are factors that can impact our ability to experience hope and purpose. I want to now narrow in and just talk about a few concepts as we close our time together. We have about 15, 13 minutes left. And I just want to hit a few of these components of hope. Like what makes hope more possible? I love this image of this plant growing up through a crack in the concrete, right? That somehow this plant just I think about that term tenacity and audacity, and I think about this plant, right? That it found a way somehow, even though it felt desolate and hopeless, it found some way. So this idea of components of hope. One of the first components that I thought about with these friends I was talking with, it was is determination. And really there's different types of determination, but it's really this self-determination. Um, the thing that challenges this determination is this idea of fatalism. It doesn't matter what I do. My choices don't matter. And grief can make us feel that way because the reality is no one is fully in control of everything in their life. You're just not. Many times it is driven by circumstances. Things happen. People in our lives might die, and we may or may not have control of that, right? Um, and so it robs us quite often of that sense of self-determination. And it's tempting to lean into this idea that, oh, well, it doesn't matter, and we just throw our hands up, and this idea of fatalism. The reality is that if we can lean into this reality that there is some self-determination, that I do have some freedom of choice. I have the ability to take responsibility of my choices. And I can focus on my inputs, not just the outputs. A lot of times we set lofty goals. I kind of stopped years ago setting lofty goals, and I lean more into the idea of vision. Um, what what do I want to put into the world as opposed to what do I want to get back from it? And it really changed things in my own life, being able to focus on those inputs, the things that I could control, because there was so much that I couldn't control. So I wasn't going to give up even the small things and lean into those. And quite often, if we begin to make these choices and we see that our choices matter, that brings us more of a sense of hope in our lives that I am capable. I can do things. I've had people who have said this to me, Andy, I never thought I would be able to even survive a loss like this. Even the fact that I got out of the bed the next morning, for that person was this sense of I my choices still matter. I'm still here. I didn't know if I could be, right? And what that looks like. Another component of hope, though, is this idea of reliance. And it's somewhat connected to the idea of choices. Can I rely on myself? Are there things that I can do? Do my choices matter? But it's not just self reliance, It's also our ability to rely on other people. Now, I know that in grief and in loss, we often are disappointed by people in our lives. Someone had said at some time that it a loss rewrites your address book, right? Like those people who are your contacts in your life. Quite often, some relationships go, and you thought the people who you thought would be there for you aren't there for you, and then the people who maybe you didn't think would be there, they are there for you. Or maybe you've lost many of those relationships, and you feel alone in your grief. And so building a community, finding a community that you can rely on becomes so important. It's why our compassionate friends groups are so important. That we um, are there to support one another, peer support, and how that works, and that we can rely on those people in our lives. As we rely on other people, we learn to rely on ourselves as well. We learn that we're capable of certain things, and as we do that, our ability to experience hope and purpose becomes more possible because I believe that I can rely on people. So it renews my sense of hope in my life, um, uh, in the goodness of other people, and my sense of hope in my own abilities to navigate the things in my life. Another component is this idea of self-efficacy and self-advocacy. Now, this is somehow tied to that tenacity and audacity, right? This idea that I can advocate for myself, have the ability to express my desires and my wants and my needs, rather than just having people, all these people telling me what I need to do and ought to do, being able to say, stop, that's not what I need right now. I don't know what I need right now. What I need is time and space. I need to be where I am in this moment. I need to grieve. I need to be left alone. Whatever it is, it's the ability to advocate for yourself. And when you're able to say to someone, that's not helpful, then that opens up this ability to have a little more hope in my life that I can do this. Or to advocate for yourself, right? Self-efficacy is the belief that one can obtain a goal or a desired outcome. And as we move closer toward that, we build that sense of confidence, and that in itself can build support looking toward hope, or a desire to construct or reconstruct your own life, right? Just that idea that my life has been shattered. Well, what does it look like to rebuild that, right? Again, it's not building it as it was. It might look very different. It'll be transformed and look very different maybe than what it was. But I have this ability to build what that looks like, or the ability to bring together various resources to help yourself. I'm just going to go out and find it and do it. One of the organizations that I spent a lot of time with over the last several years is TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. It is a wonderful program. Miss Bonnie Carroll is the founder of that organization. And I think about all the lives that have been touched because when Bonnie had her loss, she went out to find support and she didn't find it there. And she said, gosh darn it, I'm gonna make the support. I'm gonna take that and bring some resources together. And what she's done in that has created a safe space for military families who are grieving the death of a military family member. So I think of that idea of self-advocacy, self-efficacy, and how that not only has brought hope in Bonnie's life, but also hope in so many people's lives who have connected and become part of the TAPS organization. The Compassionate Friends story is very similar. Those who just worked hard at the beginning to create that space that was needed to be with other people and find that support. And I think about over these over 50 years that Compassionate Friends has existed as a concept, and almost 50 years here in the United States that it's existed, and all the lives that have been touched as a result. Another component to hope is knowledge, just simply knowledge, self knowledge. recognizing your own limits. So often, not understanding our own limitations sometimes puts us in a situation where we feel hopeless. We feel hopeless because we're not succeeding, and part of it is just not knowing our own limitations. What does that look like? And limitations can vary depending on where we are in our life. Again, sometimes in our grief, when we're going through very painful moments, that's not the time when we're doing the big stuff. That's the time when we're just doing some of those small things and giving ourselves credit for having done those small things just as much as those big things that we want to try and do in our lives. The ability to recognize what is within your own power to do, or just being able to, again, give yourself credit, look at those milestones. Um, one of the things you could also make a list of is just concrete examples of ways, things that you've done that you never thought you could do, ways you've grown, ways you've changed, ways you've improved. Again, it can be very small ways, but giving yourself credit for that. Um, Another thing about knowledge that I don't have on this slide, though, is also just knowledge about the experience you're going through. Um, there's uh, something about seeking information that can help build perspective, because sometimes our perspective can be really narrow without information and knowledge. So just going and learning, reading, and I know it's hard to read early on in grief, but as we're able to take in, even if it's just a few sentences at a time, just little things that help educate us about our situation, um, can give us more of a sense of hope in the midst of that. And just a few more as we are closing up our time. Predictability. Sometimes, if you can't do all of these other things, if you can just attempt to return a sense of predictability to your life, create some new rituals, be stubborn about it. Say, no, on these nights, this is what I do here. On this day, I do this. Have these rituals, this familiarity, this sense of formality can sometimes just be an anchor for us and can give us a sense of hope in our life, a sense of more positive outlook in that moment, a sense of orderliness, or just an infrastructure for the intangible, right? Where do I put these things? What does that look like? And so having some sort of sense, even if it's just small things, I know grief reminds us that life is unpredictable, and life is unpredictable, but we can also create these predictable things in our lives that give us something, even in time, can become something we actually look forward to. And I know that might be a foreign concept to many of us at this point, but even just allowing that in our lives, that I might look forward to something. And then just the last two to think about: vision of what can be, of the possibilities, something that I might look forward to. One of the things I used to do a lot in individual counseling is, if someone was at a place where they just couldn't see those things, we would do just a special activity. And I would say, I wonder if we can just pretend for a moment. I know that reality is this, but can we just pretend for a moment? Just imagine, what might it be like if these things were possible? And we'd have an hour or so conversation just about what ifs, imagining what that might be. That's creating vision in our lives. And whether we're connected to that vision or not, it's beginning to think about, what are the possibilities? What might that look like for myself? And then the last component, and again, there's probably many other components to hope, but the last one we'll look at today is this idea of belief, belief in your abilities. We talked about your personal agency, being able to lean into that. The more we lean into our choices, the more we might begin to believe in our abilities to make those choices work for us. Or that we can, or that things can even improve. Just the belief that things can improve in my life, or that there's something greater than myself. For some people, that takes on a spiritual belief or a religious belief, or for others who maybe faith is not an option, um, maybe it's recognizing that there are larger things than me in the world, other people, causes, that I can lean into. I've had so many people at Compassionate Friends and other organizations that I've served over the years, and I've experienced it myself, that at some point when we decide I'm going to give back, I'm going to volunteer, and the sense of hope and purpose that that brings into our life, because then we recognize that there's some bigger thing going on here than just me, than just what's happening with me, right? It's a belief that there's something greater than ourselves, or that I still have purpose, believing that meaning is still possible in our lives, and how that can lay a foundation of hope in our lives. And so these are just this concept of components of hope. I would encourage you to do this as we now are at the end of our time for this webinar. I'd encourage you to just think about for yourself, what are those components of hope for you? Everyone's different. Everyone has different experiences in grief. Grief is unique to each person, and we don't necessarily experience it the same way. And so is coping. And so just taking the time to think through some of these concepts for yourself. What does that look like for you in your life and in your life moving forward? You know, Viktor Frankl, I'll close with this quote. Viktor Frankl said, in Man's Search for Meaning, when we are no longer able to change our circumstances, we are challenged to change ourselves. I wish you all peace and for the remainder of your day. And my hope for you is that you'll be patient with yourself, that you'll recognize and remember that you are not alone. We are the Compassionate Friends, and we need not walk alone. Thank you, everyone. I bid you a peaceful evening.